Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive? Today, we're tackling something I think we can all relate to, that urge to scroll even when we know we should be doing something else. We're going to be looking at some advice from three YouTubers on this: Steph Exon, Incognito CEO, and Opal. They've got some pretty cool strategies for breaking free from that, but what really caught my eye was how their advice ties into this massive industry that's literally fighting for our attention every second of every day.
Yeah, it's like a constant battle for our brains, isn't it?
Seriously. But before we get too deep into that, let's start with StephX. He talks about how he struggled with scrolling after university, and his story is so relatable. Imagine coming home exhausted. You know you have things to do, but you end up on Instagram for like half an hour.
Or more, right.
Totally. And StephX doesn't just talk about the time wasted, but also those feelings of anxiety that scrolling doesn't actually help with.
Right. It's like we're looking for a quick fix, but it ends up making us feel worse.
Exactly. It's a sneaky cycle of procrastination that keeps us glued to our phones.
And that's where attention mining comes in, which Opal talks about in their video. These platforms are designed to keep us hooked, using things like dopamine hits and addictive design. It's almost like they're making it harder for us to break free on purpose.
So we're basically up against an army of app developers who want to hijack our attention.
Pretty much. But don't worry, Steph San has a solution.
Yeah, he's all about shifting from free time to structured time, which might sound a bit rigid, but hear me out. He's big on detailed daily schedules and to-do lists, and he loves using Google Calendar to keep everything organized. I love how he talks about getting rid of that "what do I do now" feeling that often leads to mindless scrolling.
It's like he's taking away the decision fatigue that makes us vulnerable to those distractions.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that Stefan doesn't just advocate for constant productivity. He also stresses the importance of scheduling relaxation and leisure activities. He even blocks out time for walks and journaling.
It's like he's creating a roadmap for his attention, making sure both work and rest get their dedicated space.
Right. It's about being intentional with our downtime.
Which brings us to Incognito CEO's approach.
This is where things get really interesting. He compares our attention span to a muscle.
I love that analogy.
Me too. So we can actually train our brains to resist those tempting distractions.
That's the idea. Every time you meditate, you're basically working out your focus. Incognito CEO says it strengthens the neural pathways responsible for attention, making you less impulsive.
So we're talking about bicep curls for the brain.
Exactly.
I'm in. So how does he recommend starting?
He started with just 3 minutes of meditation a day and gradually increased it.
That's encouraging. So you don't have to become a Zen master overnight to see benefits.
Nope. Even short bursts can make a difference.
This is awesome. Okay, so we've got Steph Kalason's structured time and Incognito CEO's attention muscle training. Now, what about Opal? Their approach seems a bit different, right?
Definitely. They're all about taking control of those pesky apps.
Like actually setting limits.
Exactly. They have this app lock feature that's pretty cool. They give an example of a furniture designer named Jenny who uses Pinterest for inspiration, but she doesn't want to get lost in it.
So it's not about avoiding social media completely, but setting smarter boundaries.
Exactly. Jenny uses app lock to limit her Pinterest use to 6 15-minute sessions a day.
I like that. It's about being intentional with how we use those apps.
And here's where it gets even more interesting. They talk about open limits instead of just overall time limits.
Open limits, what's that?
It controls how many times you can actually open an app.
Yeah.
So let's say you set an open limit of 3 for Instagram. Once you've opened it 3 times, that's it for the day.
That's really clever. Because sometimes it's not about how long we're on an app, but how often we check it.
And get this, Opal found that a whopping 75% of app opens are compulsive.
75%? That's insane.
Right. We're basically on autopilot most of the time.
I can definitely relate to that.
And it all ties back to that attention mining concept we talked about earlier. These companies are actively trying to grab our attention, so we need strategies to fight back.
It's like a constant tug of war for our brains. So far, we've got Steffexon's structured time, Incognito CEO's attention muscle training, and Opal's app control. That's a pretty solid toolkit.
It is. And even though they come from different angles, there's a common thread. They all emphasize understanding the forces working against us, the dopamine, the addictive design, our own habits. And then they all talk about taking proactive steps to counteract those forces.
So it's not about feeling bad about scrolling, but about empowering ourselves to make more intentional choices.
Exactly. And that's what we're all about here, right?
Absolutely. This has given me so much to think about.
Me too. And before we move on, which approach resonated most with you so far?
Yeah, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Definitely. And remember, even small changes can make a big difference.
So true.
But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's break down each approach in more detail and see what practical tips we can glean from these YouTubers.
Okay, let's unpack this structured time thing a bit more. What makes it so effective, and how can people actually start using it?
Well, one of those interesting things Steph Exon talks about is decision fatigue.
Oh, tell me about it.
Right, it's that feeling of being overwhelmed by all the choices we have to make throughout the day.
Sometimes I feel like I've made a million decisions before I even leave the house.
And all those decisions, even the small ones, drain our mental energy. By the time we get home, our decision-making muscle is exhausted. And that's when we're more likely to give in to those impulsive urges to scroll.
So by creating a structured schedule, we're basically eliminating a bunch of decisions.
Exactly. You're freeing up mental energy for other things.
That makes so much sense. It's like putting your brain on autopilot for those everyday decisions.
Precisely. When you have a plan for your day, you don't have to waste energy deciding what to do next. You just follow the roadmap you've created.
I love that. But what about people who like spontaneity? Doesn't a rigid schedule sound a bit boring?
That's a great question, and Stephenson addresses that in his video. He says structured time doesn't have to be super rigid. It's about finding a balance that works for you.
So there's room for flexibility.
Absolutely. He suggests starting by scheduling just a few key blocks of time each day, like maybe work, exercise, and a relaxing evening activity. As you get comfortable, you can add more structure.
Okay, that sounds more manageable, but how does he actually create his schedule? Any tips?
He actually walks viewers through his whole process using Google Calendar.
No way. He shows his own calendar. That's
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, even color codes everything. Different colors for work, personal stuff, leisure, even me time.
That's so smart. I'm a visual person, so that would definitely help me.
He also uses this time boxing technique. He allocates a specific amount of time for each task on his to-do list. It helps him stay focused and avoid getting stuck on one thing for too long.
Time boxing. That sounds intense. Does he time box everything?
He even time boxes things like checking email and social media.
Wow, that's next level. I'm going to have to try that. But what about unexpected things that come up? Does his schedule account for that?
He actually builds in buffer time throughout his day for those unexpected interruptions.
Okay, so it's not about creating this perfect, unrealistic plan, but about having a flexible framework.
Exactly. And here's another great tip from Steph Exon. He schedules transition time between activities. Instead of jumping from one thing to the next, he blocks out time for things like taking a walk or grabbing a snack.
That's so interesting. It's like giving your brain a chance to reset.
Right. And all these little things work together to create a more intentional way of living.
I'm starting to see that.
And remember, this is just scratching the surface of Steph Exon's approach. His video goes into way more detail.
We'll definitely link to it in the show notes.
Definitely. But for now, let's move on to Incognito CEO's attention muscle training through meditation.
Okay, I'm ready to hear more about this.
So Incognito CEO starts by saying that we live in this super distracting world, and it's actually weakening our attention spans.
It's like our brains are being trained to crave constant stimulation.
Exactly. And that's where meditation comes in. He sees it as a way to counteract that attention deficit. He says that by meditating regularly, we can strengthen those neural pathways for focus and impulse control.
Like building mental biceps, but for our attention span.
He actually uses that phrase, bicep curls for the brain.
So how does meditation actually work? What's going on in our brains when we do it?
Basically, you're training your mind to focus on a single point of reference, like your breath or a specific image. At first, your mind will wander, which is normal, but you gently guide your attention back over and over again.
So it's like a mental workout, flexing those focus muscles.
Exactly. And the benefits go beyond just attention span. Studies show meditation can also reduce stress, improve sleep, boost mood, even increase empathy.
Wow, that's amazing. It's like a total upgrade for your mind and body.
Mhm.
But let's be real, meditation can be a bit intimidating, especially for beginners.
Definitely. Incognito CEO talks about how he started with just 3 minutes a day and gradually increased it.
So we don't have to become monks and meditate for hours to see results.
Not at all. Even short bursts can make a difference.
Yeah.
And he emphasizes that consistency is key, even if it's just a few minutes each day.
That's good to know. Any other tips for beginners?
Don't get discouraged if your mind wanders. It's totally normal. Just acknowledge the thought and gently guide your attention back.
Okay, I'm feeling more confident about trying meditation. It sounds like a powerful tool for taking back our attention and creating a calmer mind. Before we wrap up this part, let's talk about Opal's approach, which seems more tech-focused.
Absolutely. They're all about giving us tools to create healthier boundaries with our devices.
So instead of relying on willpower, we're using technology to help us stay on track.
Exactly. And remember those open limits we talked about?
Yeah, the ones that control how many times you can open an app.
Right. That's one of the key features of their app.
So if you're someone who mindlessly checks Instagram every 5 minutes, you can set an open limit of, say, 3 times a day.
And once you've hit your limit, the app is locked until the next day.
That's brilliant. It's like having a digital bouncer for those tempting apps. But what about times when you genuinely need to use an app for work or something important?
You have total control over which apps to lock and for how long. You can set different schedules for weekdays and weekends, and even create exceptions for specific times.
So if you need to use an app for work during certain hours, you can set an exception.
Exactly. It's all about finding a balance that works for you.
This is sounding more and more appealing. It's like having a personalized digital assistant to help you stay focused. But doesn't this feel like admitting defeat? Like we need technology to solve a problem with technology.
That's a valid point, and Opal addresses that in their video. They emphasize that App Lock isn't a magic solution, it's a tool to help us break free from those ingrained habits.
So it's more about using technology as a stepping stone to create healthier habits in the long run.
Precisely. The goal is to eventually not need those external controls. But until then, App Lock can be a helpful ally.
This is all making so much sense. We've got Steph Agan's structured time, Incognito CEO's attention muscle training, and Opal's app control. It's like a triple threat against mindless scrolling.
And what's fascinating is that they all have that common thread of understanding the forces working against us and then taking proactive steps to fight back.
So it's not about guilt, but about empowerment. I love that.
Exactly.
This is giving me so much to think about.
Me too. Before we move on to the next part of our deep dive, let's take a moment to digest all of this. Which approach resonated most with you? What are some takeaways you're already starting to apply?
Yeah, share your insights in the comments below. We're all in this together.
Absolutely. And remember, even small changes can make a big difference.
This has been such an insightful conversation so far.
It really has. We've covered so much ground already, but we're just getting started.
In the next part of our deep dive, we'll be exploring even more techniques for creating a mindful and balanced relationship with our devices.
We'll be talking about everything from setting digital boundaries to designing a tech-free environment that supports your well-being.
Can't wait. See you in part 2.
Welcome back to our deep dive. I'm excited to continue exploring how to reclaim our attention in this digital world.
Me too. That last part was packed with insightful tips. I'm already feeling inspired to ditch the mindless scrolling and create a more intentional relationship with my devices.
That's great to hear. Remember, even small changes can make a big difference. Pick one strategy that resonated with you and start experimenting.
Absolutely. But before we move on, I want to hear more about Opal's approach, especially that app lock feature. It sounds like a game changer for impulsive app checking.
It really is. It's a fantastic tool for setting boundaries with our devices.
I love that. It's like taking back control from those sneaky algorithms. But is there downside to using an app to control our app usage? Seems ironic, right?
It does, at first. But think of it like this. We're using technology to fight back against the negative effects of technology.
I'm using a shield to protect ourselves.
Exactly. We're not surrendering to technology, but using it strategically to create healthier habits.
That's a great way to look at it.
And remember, App Lock is just one tool. It's not a magic solution, but it can be a helpful ally.
Okay, that makes sense. But let's zoom out for a second. We've been focusing on specific strategies, but what about the reasons we're so drawn to our devices in the first place? What's the psychology behind all this digital distraction?
That's a great question. Both StephX and Incognito CEO touch on that in their videos. They both say that our brains are wired to seek out novelty and stimulation. And today, we're constantly bombarded with new information and notifications.
It's like a constant dopamine rush.
Exactly. And these platforms are designed to exploit that. They use algorithms to keep us engaged, feeding us a personalized stream of content that keeps us scrolling.
It's like a digital slot machine. We keep pulling the lever, hoping for that next hit.
That's a great analogy. And the more we engage, the more our brains crave it.
So it's not just about willpower. We're fighting against a system designed to keep us hooked.
It can feel that way,
Yeah.
but it's important to remember that we're not powerless. By understanding the psychology, we can develop strategies to fight back and reclaim control.
So it's about becoming aware of those triggers and patterns and then finding ways to break free.
Exactly. That's where the strategies we've been talking about come in. Whether it's structuring our time, meditating, or using app lock, we're rewiring our brains to be less reactive and more intentional.
This is making so much sense. It's like we're taking back control of the story.
Exactly. And remember, it's a journey, not a destination. There will be ups and downs, but as long as we're aware and committed to making changes, we're heading in the right direction.
Okay, I'm feeling more hopeful now. It's not about being perfect, but about making progress.
Exactly. And progress looks different for everyone. The key is to experiment and find what works for you.
So it's about creating a personalized approach that fits our lives.
Absolutely. And this isn't just about reducing screen time for the sake of it. It's about freeing up our time and attention for the things that truly matter, whether it's spending time with loved ones, pursuing passions, or simply being more present.
That's a great point. It's about creating a life that's aligned with our values, not dictated by our devices.
Exact.
I think that's a great takeaway for this segment. But before we wrap up, what are your thoughts on this? We've talked about the negative impacts of technology, but are there any potential benefits?
That's an interesting question. It deserves more discussion than we usually give it. While it's crucial to be aware of the downsides, technology has also brought about incredible advancements in communication, education, healthcare, and so many other areas.
Right. Technology itself isn't good or bad, it's how we use it.
Exactly. And I think the key is balance. Harnessing the power of technology while being mindful of its pitfalls. Using it as a tool to enhance our lives, not control them.
I love that. It's about being intentional and mindful, not just with technology, but with everything. Okay, I think we've covered a lot in this segment. We've explored the psychology, discussed boundaries, and even touched on the potential benefits of technology.
We have. And remember, this is just the beginning. There's so much more to explore about intentional living in the digital age.
Absolutely. But for now, let's reflect on what we've learned. What are some key takeaways? What actions are you feeling inspired to take?
I'm curious to hear your thoughts, too. Let us know in the comments.
Yes, please share your insights. We're all in this together. And now, for the grand finale of our deep dive, we're tackling the big question. What would it look like to design our ideal day? A day that balances productivity, leisure, and intentional phone use.
It's a great question that can really spark some self-reflection.
Yeah.
Get those creative juices flowing. We'll be back in just a moment to dive into what it truly means to live a more intentional and fulfilling life.
Okay, let's get those creative juices flowing. I'm ready to design my ideal day, one where I'm productive, relaxed, and intentional with my phone. It sounds amazing.
It does, doesn't it? And the best part is, it can be more than just a dream. It's about making conscious choices and designing a day that really reflects what matters to us.
So where do we even start? Do we throw our phones away and run off to a cabin in the woods? I'm kidding, kinda.
Well, a digital detox can be great, but designing our ideal day doesn't have to be about extremes. It's more about finding that balance, bringing technology into our lives in a way that actually makes them better, not worse.
Okay, that makes sense. So how do we find that balance? What are some things to think about when we're designing this ideal day?
I think a good place to start is picturing our day from the moment we wake up. What's our morning routine like? Do we reach for our phone right away, or do we do something more grounding first, like maybe meditating, journaling, or just having a cup of coffee in peace?
I'll be honest, I'm definitely a reach for my phone person, but I'm trying to change that. I love that idea of starting with something more mindful, like a quick meditation. It just feels like it sets a better tone for the whole day.
You got it. It's all about those conscious choices, being in control of how we spend our time and energy instead of letting our devices run the show.
So once we've got that mindful morning routine down, what's next? How do we bring work and productivity into this ideal day without falling into that digital black hole?
That's where Stefika's structured time comes in. Remember all that talk about schedules and time boxing? We can totally use those ideas here.
Right. We can actually schedule blocks of time for focused work, minimizing those distractions so we can be more productive. But what about when we actually need to be online for work or other things? How do we stop those online sessions from turning into endless scrolling?
That's where Opal's app lock can be a lifesaver. Remember, we can use it to set limits on how often and how long we can use certain apps. So even when we need to be online, we can still keep those boundaries in place and avoid getting sidetracked.
So smart. It's like having a little digital buddy who's keeping us on track. Okay, so we've got the mindful morning, the structured work blocks, an app lock to keep those distractions away. What about leisure time? How do we make sure our downtime is actually restorative and not just another excuse to scroll?
This is where it gets fun. Remember, Steph Exon talked about scheduling leisure activities. Well, in our ideal day, we can be really intentional about how we spend our free time. We can plan things that actually feed our souls, like spending time with people we love, reading, getting outside, working on a hobby, or just relaxing without feeling guilty about it.
I love that. It's about making time for the things that make us feel alive, not just zoning out on our phones because we're bored or feel like we should be doing something.
Exactly. And hey, this is our ideal day, so let's get creative. What are some things you've always wanted to try but never seem to have the time for? Now is your chance to add them to your dream day.
Good question. I've always wanted to take a pottery class. Maybe I'll put that in my ideal day. It's funny how just thinking about these things makes me feel so much more energized and inspired.
I know, right? It's like we're giving ourselves permission to dream a little and create a day that really reflects what we care about. But there's another important piece to this, our digital environment. How can we create a space that actually supports these intentional living goals?
Oh, that's a good point. I've definitely had those nights where I'm trying to relax, but I keep getting bombarded with notifications, and it's so tempting to just check my phone constantly.
Exactly. So in our ideal day, we might create a tech-free zone in our homes, a place where devices are just off limits. Maybe it's our bedroom, a reading nook, or even just a basket where we put our phones for a few hours.
I love that, like creating a physical boundary to help us disconnect and recharge.
Speaking of recharging, how do we end our ideal day? Scrolling through social media until we fall asleep? Or is there a better way? In our ideal day, we might go for something a bit more calming. Maybe reading a book, taking a bath, listening to music, or doing some stretches. Anything that helps us relax and get ready for a good night's sleep.
This is all sounding amazing. It's incredible how just a few small changes can make our day feel so much more aligned with what we really want.
It really is. And remember, this is just a starting point. We can adjust and tweak as we go, trying different things and seeing what works best for each of us.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. We started feeling overwhelmed by all the digital stuff, and now we're talking about designing a day that really nourishes our minds and bodies.
It's been great diving into this with you. And remember, you get to choose how you spend your time and attention. You can choose to be more intentional, more present, more connected to the things that matter.
That's a great way to put it. So for everyone listening, take a moment to picture your own ideal day. What would it look like? What would you prioritize? How would you use technology in a way that makes your life better, not more stressful?
Remember, even small changes can have a big impact. Try adding one new habit, one boundary, one activity that brings you joy. You might be surprised at how those small changes can ripple out and make a real difference.
And be kind to yourself. Change takes time and effort, and you might stumble along the way, but don't give up. You have the power to create a life that's more focused, more fulfilling, and more true to you.
That's it for this deep dive into intentional living. We hope you've enjoyed the journey and feel inspired to reclaim your focus and live a more fulfilling life in this digital age.
We hope you're leaving with some new ideas and a renewed sense of possibility. Until next time, stay curious, stay mindful, and keep scrolling with intention.